Okay, good afternoon everyone, Shalom Aleichem. Now, the truth is we had an Iyun shir on Daf Nun about the Gemara of Rabbi Akiva and the crown that he wanted to put on his wife's head, but I could not resist doing this shtickle on Daf Nun Amud Beis. We'll do another one, because the Gemara tells us on Nun Amud Beis that Rebbi made a wedding for Reb Shimon, his son, and it was written on the wedding hall, 24,000 myriads of dinar Rebbi spent on the wedding hall, and he didn't invite Bar Kapara. And Bar Kapara said, if this is going to be for those who violate his will, to those who do his will, all the more so. When finally Rebbi invited Bar Kapara changed his tune, and he said, for those who do the will of Hashem in this world, certainly in the world to come. The $1 million question is, how can Bar Kapara call Rebbi Ovrei Retzono, somebody who violates the will of Hashem? What did Bar Kapara mean that Rebbi is someone who violates the will of Hashem? So Rabbi Kiveger in the Goyen Hashas says, Ayin bezeh davar nechmad b'tshuva Shevus Yaakov chelik aleph siman kuf pei beis. Look at a beautiful, dear explanation in the tshuva of the Shevus Yaakov in siman kuf pei beis. Now this is very interesting. The Shevus Yaakov was the author of the Iyun Yaakov on Shas. He also wrote Shas Tshuva Shevus Yaakov. He also wrote Choik Yaakov on Hilchos Pesach. I had the zchus to be at his kever. He's buried in Metz in France. And in Chelek Aleph of the Tshuvas of the Shevus Yaakov, in the final Tshuva, the Shevus Yaakov addresses this question. And in doing so, he also addresses another interesting question, namely, he's not trying to answer this question, but what I was bothered by is, what does this Gemara have to do with Masechta Nedarim? Why does the Gemara bring in the story of Rebbi marrying off his son? What does this have to do with anything? I mean, it is in the aftermath of Rebbi being surprised that there are 1,000 ways to make figs, but still, why this Gemara explicitly, or especially? So the Shevus Yaakov, Sim Kuf Pei Beis, he says, Af she'ein kan mekoyim mikol makoyim, kedei l'sayim b'divrei agada v'davar tov. He says, even though this is not the place, but to end off with divrei agada and something good, kasavti kan ma shenashalti, I'm writing what I was asked, kish nasati al simchas b'ni, when I traveled to the simcha of my son Harava Mufla Maharash Nero Yefarishli Hai Sugya de Nedarim Daf Nun Amud Beis Rebbi Avidlei Hilula l'Reb Shimon Berei V'kasav al Beis Genana Esrim v'arba alfen riboi dinrei nafki al Bei Genana Dain V'loi azmanei l'Bar Kapara. Rashi says, why did he not invite Bar Kapara? Because Bar Kapara was a badchen. Perush Rashi lo yazmei l'Bar Kapara lefi shahaya ish badchen u'misyarei shemayasa davar sheyischayk. Amar Bar Kapara im la'ovrei Retzono kach lo Retzono alachas kama kama azmanei. Finally, he invited him. Perush Rashi Amar Bar Kapara l'Rebbi im la'ovrei Retzono mashpia lo toiva kol kach la'oisei Retzono shiu meganehu al shaloi shahaya meganeo al shaloi zimnehu. Basically, Bar Kapara, Rashi explains, disparaged Rebbi that he didn't invite him to the wedding. V'tama akra v'chi b'shvil shalei azmene yeganeo kulei hai l'Rebbi shahaya Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Because Rebbi didn't invite him to the wedding, Bar Kapara shamed him. Shamatzinu shazakaf eser etzba'osav. That we find that he lifted up his 10 fingers. K'di isa b'parak hanoisei. The Shevus Yaakov says he's not pleased with what the Marsha says. So he gives a wondrous explanation here. Here we go. Hine bevadei sugya zu tamua ma'od va'oisiv tmi al tmiyasa milvad shu davar tamua mitzad hamesbayish shu Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Aside from the fact that the one he was embarrassing is a pella that he would embarrass. So you're asking, what are you asking? Oh, that's that. But the simple pshat, the way Rashi learns, is that he was being Magana Rebbi for not inviting him. So aside from the fact, I have to open this up again. Aside from the fact that mitzad Rebbi, that Bar Kapara would embarrass him, that's a pella. How could Bar Kapara embarrass Rebbi? But he says, from the vantage point of Bar Kapara himself, Elagam mitzad hamevayish hadavar tamud Elagam gam Bar Kapara hayagado b'doirai. Also, Bar Kapara was very great in his generation. V'asa mishana Bar Kapara ichyala daite lahoitzi shem ra al Rebbi lekroisai Ovrei Retzono filo derech schois v'hitol. How could Bar Kapara was gado b'dora, and he made Mishnas Bar Kapara? How could he come to call Rebbi this disparaging term, Ovrei Retzono, even as a joke, even as a hitol? Kasha Adav Amrai. So, number one, how could he embarrass Rebbi? Number two, how could Bar Kapara do that? V'su kiven shemetchilu loy azmei kedei shelo yischakim kim achar she'amar davar zeh lama azmenei. And if the reason why Rebbi didn't invite him is he didn't want to make him laugh, so why in the end did he invite him? He should have gotten even angrier. Even though Rebbi was excessively humble, when Rebbi died, Anava and Yiras Chet was bato mikamaka matzinu shehikbid misham kavod haTorah. We do find that Rebbi was makbid because of kavod haTorah. K'deisa be'mayid katan daf yudvav Amar Aleph. Reb Shimon Rebbi Bar Kapara Havi Yasri v'Kagarsi Kashelhu Shmaitza Amar Le Reb Shimon Bar Kapara Davar Zeh Tzarich LeRebbi Amar Bar Kapara Le Reb Shimon Ma Rebbi Amar B'Davar Zeh Azal Amar Lavua Ikbid. We find that Rebbi was makbid at Bar Kapara. Asi Bar Kapara Las Chazuyele Amar Le Bar Kapara Ini Makercha Mei Olam. Bar Kapara says, I don't know you. Yada Dinaka Milsa B'Daite Noag Nezivufsa B'Nafshi. Adkan Harei de Ikbid Olav Al Davar Katan Kaza. We find Rebbi was makbid on Bar Kapara for a small thing. V'Koshike in Shekarolei Ovrei Retzono. Certainly for calling him Ovrei Retzono, he should have been makbid. Not, he shouldn't invite him. So first of all, how could Bar Kapara say this to Rebbi? Number two, how could Bar Kapara do this? Number three, Rebbi should not have invited him after he said that. Rebbi should have gotten even angrier. V'koshin shekarlei Ovrei Retzono ve'ich azmnei adarab lo choshesh dorab klal v'gam ula yischak. Maybe he would cause Rebbi to laugh. That's the whole reason he didn't invite him to begin with. This is a classic expression. To understand the words of the sages and their riddles. You know, the Gemara says that even the sichas chulin of Talmidei Chachamim you could learn from. It says even their leaves will not wither. The Isa ba'archaim soif siman tav kov samach aser la'adam sheyimale schoik piv ba'olam hazeh. The Gemara, the Shulchan Aruch says that it is prohibited to fill your mouth with laughter in this world. Because of Sham Hataz Sivkatan Zayin, the Venusach HaTorah Kasav begalus hazeh. The Taz says you're not to fill your mouth with laughter, not in nowadays, in this galus. So says the Shvus Yaakov, it depends. There is a distinction when you're allowed to laugh and when you're not. Regarding joy, which is not of mitzvah, vaday asar, it's certainly asar, afilu shalai bizman hagalus, even not in the time of the galus. Lamale pivschaik. So in the time, let's say, of the Beis HaMikdash, then if it's not a simcha shel mitzvah, you can't fill up your mouth with laughter. Aval b'simcha shel mitzvah, ha'isa heter, Bizman Beis HaMikdash Kayim. But a Simcha Shel Mitzvah was mutter when the Beis HaMikdash stood. Uvizman HaGolos, but in the time of the exile, Arva Kol Simcha. All Simcha has become diluted and mixed. Afilu b'Simcha Shel Mitzvah, Kugain b'Chasana Purim, B'Kol Makom Lo Yimali Schok Piv. That nowadays, in the time of the Golos, even Simcha Shel Mitzvah you can't be Mamale. Meaning when the Beis HaMikdash stood, Simcha Shel Rishus you can't be Mamale. And in the Golos, even Simcha Shel Mitzvah you can't be Mamale. Kei Nira L'Aniyas Nachan Ad Kan L'Shen Hataz. Says the Shvus Yaakov V'Nira Dahainu Taima de Rebbi Shahay Misyare Shayishchayk. You know why Rebbi was afraid he would laugh? Lafisha Rebbi Hoy Bizman HaGolos Achar HaChurban Uchaperish Rashi Gamkein Parakama Dechulin Davavam Ad Bezer Maschal Es Beis Shanayin Sham V'Isa B'Gemara De Soif Makos Ram Gamliel Rabbi Lezben Azariah Rabbi Yeshua Yemahachim Aderech V'Shamu Kol Amula V'Schilu Heim Boichim. They heard the sound, the tumultuous sound from Rome, and they cried. Rabbi Akiva Mesachek. What did Rabbi Akiva say? Amar le lekach ani mesachek im la'ovrei Retzono kach lo'isay Retzono lachas kama v'kama. Rabbi Akiva said, if those who violate the will of Hashem are so successful, certainly those who do the will of Hashem. That means Rabbi Akiva holds you're allowed to laugh bizman hazeh. Why? Because if the Rishonim are successful, alachas kama v'kama la'asad lavai. V'im kein Rabbi Akiva mutar l'schok mitam zeh de'im l'risham kach lo'isay Retzono lachas kama v'kama. That's the machloikis Rebbi and Bar Kapara. Rebbi didn't invite Bar Kapara to the party because he didn't want to laugh in the time of the Golos. So Bar Kapara invoked the historic epic words of Rabbi Akiva, Im la'ovrei Retzono kach la'osay Retzono lachas kama v'kama. That's the svar of Rabbi Akiva. So then you're allowed to laugh for Simcha Shel Mitzvah. That's the machlokes Rebbi and Bar Kapara. Rebbi held even the Simcha Shel Mitzvah you're not allowed to laugh. Bar Kapara, I would add, says to Rebbi, hey Rebbi, you know, you passed away the day Rabbi Akiva was killed. You were born the day Rabbi Akiva was killed. Don't you know the famous words of Rabbi Akiva? Im la'ovrei Retzono kach la'osay Retzono l'kol shekain. By the way, Rabbi Akiva lived during the time of the Beis HaMikdash, but he also lived after. And he said those words in the times of the Churban. That means Rabbi Akiva holds, you're allowed to laugh. Begeder im la'ovrei Retzono kach. Rebbi was not calling... Bar Kapara was not referring to Rebbi when he said la'ovrei Retzono kach. Bar Kapara was invoking the famous words of Rabbi Akiva when he said im la'ovrei Retzono kach. So, Imkain says the Shvus Yaakov in this, the final tshuva at the end of Chelek Aleph. Imkain zeh haya pilpul shel Rebbi Bar Kapara. The Rebbi lo yaznei Bar Kapara kedei shelo yischak b'zman hagolos. Amar le Bar Kapara im la'ovrei Retzono kach lo'osay Retzono lachas kama v'kama. Kisvaras Rabbi Akiva im kein muter l'schok al kapanim b'simcha shel mitzvah v'l'schok amarti mahoilal al kein azmane. So therefore Rebbi conceded and he invited him. V'duk v'nimtza nachain v'emes nirali hakatan Yaakov. What an awesome approach to this cryptic Gemara of the Shvus Yaakov and Rabbi Akiva Eger, and the Goyin Hashas brings it. Okay, so even though we had an Iyun share on Nun Amud Beis, but Al Timna Toiv Le Ba'alim, I could not withhold this. Okay, so this is Nun Aleph Amud Beis.
Recording stop.